Recording progress.
Teresa, can you start, please?
Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Teresa Horeisova from the Geneva Internet Platform, and it is my big pleasure to moderate today's event, which is entitled Data Economy, Human-Centric Approach at the Forefront. Now, this event was put together through cooperation among a number of partners, which I would like to mention now, is the European Delegation to the United Nations here in Geneva, together with the Permanent Mission of Switzerland, the Permanent Mission of Slovenia, which you know is now holding the presidency of the Council of the EU, and ultimately the Geneva Internet Platform. And here we are joining you from premises of the ConfTech of the Geneva Internet Platform, where we are trying to experiment with hybrid and virtual meetings. We value that you've decided to spend this time with us. Now, this is one and the first event in a series. We will have 4 events that we have entitled From Geneva, Reflections on Digital Future. Why Geneva? Geneva, as you can see now very shortly behind me, is a very important digital policy hub, where so many actors involved in digital policy are involved. At the Geneva Internet Platform, we have actually tried to map all these actors through an exercise that we call Geneva Digital Policy Atlas, available on our website, where you can try to zoom in and understand how these actors are involved in digital policy and contributing to the global discourse on cyber issues. Now, this event is truly hybrid. So while majority of our speakers are joining us from Geneva, we also have a very valued speaker joining us from Slovenia. And it is my pleasure to introduce Mrs. Maja Bogataj-Jancic, who is the co-chair of the Data Governance Working Group, Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence, and the head of the Intellectual Property Institute in Slovenia. And joining us here in our studio in Geneva, I would like to introduce you to our other speakers. So we have with us Pascal Marmier on my right, who is the Secretary General at the Economy of Trust Foundation at SIGPA. Welcome. We also have with us Mrs. Lene Wendlan, who is the Chief of our Business and Human Rights at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Also, welcome to you. Now sitting on my left, we have Paul Olivia De from mydata.io, mydata.org, personaldata.io, and hestia.ai. And last but not least, Ambassador Thomas Schneider, who is the head of international relations at the Federal Office for Communications of Switzerland, and also, which is very relevant for our event, the co-lead of the Swiss Network on Digital Self-Determination. As you can imagine, this event is also supported by quite some people joining us in the backgrounds, but one of them will be visible, and that's our colleague Stephanie Burg-Psaila, Director for Digital Policy. Stephanie will be the bridge between what is happening in the chat and here in the room. We will make sure that any questions and comments that you have are passed to us here, and we can reflect on them. So feel free to use, if you're joining us in Zoom, the chat function there, or feel free to use the comment function if you're watching us on YouTube or on Facebook of the Geneva Internet Platform. So I hope this all works, and Stephanie will be providing you further details as we go. Now, as I said, this event is really meant to discuss the various relations in our society along data, and what is actually, how it has changed us as citizens, the relationship between citizens, the state, the private sector, how data has shaped these relationships. So my first kickoff question is, and I would also like Arvind to put the image in the background where we have tried to illustrate this very complex interrelation when it goes to interchanges of data among these 3 kind of stakeholder groups. I would like to ask all of our panelists to shortly reflect, to kick us off, on how these data-related considerations have changed our society. Maybe I will start with you, Pascal.
Sure, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. I think what has changed is first, every second, we're producing 2 megabytes of data. So, do it by a couple of 100 millions and you imagine that it has an impact on our life, can be positive, can be elements of disinformation. But I think as a society, we've basically transformed ourselves. And then I really look forward to hearing also from the panelists on how it has changed institutions, right? Obviously, issues of transparency, access to data, equality or inequalities in some of those institutions, I think is really interesting because data has changed certainly the equation that there is. And if we look forward, because we're in digital future, anything that's happening this day, right? From analog to digital, think about tokenization. If I can, pay or have to pay 4 million for the picture of a dog, right? Mm-hmm. There's a bit of a buzzy element to it, but I think there's real issues behind, right? When we start putting things in digital format, even though it can be like crazy prices, but just kind of things that will also lead maybe to more automation or more intelligent systems. I think it basically is and will continue to transform our society.
Thank you, Pascal. Lena, it's practical to go to you next.
Yes, no, thank you. Thank you very much. I agree with what has been said. I think from a human rights perspective, I think we need to think about one of the biggest considerations is obviously the issues like right to privacy, who owns our data, how can we control who owns our data, how is data used to enable us to navigate society, to get access to public services, get access to private services like finance, etc. So I think that there is a lot of issues that relates to the individual data and who holds the power over our data, mm-hmm. and what right do we have over them. And so I think that it's about power imbalances, addressing power imbalances when we are going into to data policy making. What is it? How do we recalibrate, and using the international human rights standards as the framework to inform the policy making in these different contexts. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Lena. And going to you, Paul Olivier.
Well, thank you. So I would just build up on what has been said so far. So very much, we produce a lot of data. This data starts close to us. I produce it by moving around, by interacting with services or with other people. But then what I find very interesting is to concentrate on this power and the logic that will define where this data goes and what is done with it, and how much of that power affects the logic that will then be followed. We know that in the commercial space, data tends to be concentrated, that power tends to get accumulated progressively, and that leads to very systemic problems. For instance, disinformation that is mind-bogglingly difficult to address. And then what do we do with this data? Suddenly we have big companies that hold a lot of this data, a lot of this power to also correct the systemic effects. How do we fight back partially for control over this data so that it can also address social issues, broader issues? Those are the kind of things that very much interest me and I think are very much at the pressing issues right now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Paul Olivier. Thomas.
Thank you, Therese, and hello, everybody. Much has already been said, of course. I think more and more people realize that the use of data can make our lives more comfortable, more practical, more efficient, which is per se a good thing. At the same time, we are feeling or in reality losing control over our data, and we may lose control over our lives. And so we need to find a way from the old concept where data protection or privacy was preventing data from being used to, as you have already said, developing mechanisms of how people can control what their data is used for, how they get a share of the benefits that are created, and so on and so forth. I think this is the change that we are realizing more and more. And this is easily said, but it's not so easily done. So I'll stop here first.
No, thank you very much, Thomas. And you see, I've actually caught myself making a huge mistake, and that is that I left our remote speaker to contribute as the last one. So as we are all together internalizing how hybrid events should work, this is exactly how they should not work. So Maya, please apologize me and share with us your reflections on this kickoff question. Thank you.
Teresa, please don't worry. This works very well for me because all previous speaker already elaborated very well. And so I can only bring my small perspective to that. It's obviously that data are essential for many artificial intelligence and machine learning systems today. So that's why they are incredibly important for economy, but society as well. So it's very important that we are aware of the big consequences. So many institutions worldwide deal with the importance of good data governance. I was invited to contribute as a co-chair of the data governance working group in the GPA, which is the Global Partnership for Artificial Intelligence, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative that was established and launched last year in June 2020 with the 15 founding members. This initiative, the aim of this initiative is, one of the aims is to support and guide responsible development and use and adoption of artificial intelligence that is human-centric and grounded in human rights, inclusion, diversity, and innovation. To do this work, this initiative has 4 working groups. Actually 5, because the youngest one, which started to work immediately at the same time, is also like pandemic working group. But the others are responsible artificial intelligence, future of work, innovation and commercialization, and data governance. And this is the group that I co-chair with my great co-chair, superhuman and super expert, Jenny Tennyson, who is otherwise Open Data Institute from UK. And the mandate of our group is to collect evidence, shape research, and undertake applied artificial intelligence projects and provide expertise. But our goal is to promote the data for artificial intelligence is collected, used, shared, archived, and deleted in ways that are consistent with human rights, with inclusion, with diversity, innovation, economic growth, and sustainable United Nations goals. So, and we took our work very serious, our mandate very seriously. And at the beginning, we did a framework which laid down the foundation of some definition and terms in this forest of data governance, and also laid down the roadmap for our future work. It is available on our website. And the second piece of our work was exactly on the role of data in artificial intelligence. So it's again like a mapping experiment that we did, like founding document that we base our future work. Currently, our current 2 projects are focused on data trust and data justice, which the titles of those projects can be very informative. What we find is the important, is very important focus, or should be deserved in this current time, especially the project on data justice, which wants to show where the research is lacking and what needs to be done. I find it extremely important. And what we want to do in future is also like to join our efforts and focus on also privacy enhancing technologies, but we don't want just focus on privacy, but also on equity, sovereignty, and other important rights. I need to say that in our work, it's expert-based initiative. Experts are members in our groups. Governments are listening and following our work and steer our work. But it's very important that United Kingdom found our work very relevant, and we got quite a lot of financial support for the work on data trust and data justice. So I use this opportunity to sketch what we do and why we think we are important, together with all other initiatives that are out there, and we will discuss, and because we want to collaborate, and it's very important that, especially in the data governance working group, that we are like geographically diverse and inclusive, and that our work is open. But yes, at the summit last year, I said everybody talks about artificial intelligence. It's so fancy, but the hard-working cousin of artificial intelligence is data. So data governance is the mother of the artificial intelligence, not just the cousin, it's the mother. If data governance is not done right, then many things can go wrong. So it's essential founding building block in the process of building good and reliable and responsible and human-centered artificial intelligence and machine learning system.
Thank you very much, Maya, for that. We will come back to many of the issues that you hinted during this debate, I'm sure. Now, let's talk a little bit about data protection policies. This is obviously a big issue. And sometimes, of course, there is this rather shortcut view that kind of harsh data protection policies hinder innovation. Now, how much is that accurate? And as we have two speakers actually from the private sector, maybe I'll turn to them. Pascal, to start with you.
Sure, thank you very much. So I wouldn't necessarily put the two one against another. You'd be surprised how much example, and I'm sure Paul might know a lot more than I do, of really regulation that basically triggers more innovation. I think what we have, if we have a data economy, it might be a shadow data economy to a certain extent, right? Why is it that it's not governments that monetize the fact that, you know, the physical representation of the roads, for example, go through a large company, but not through government, right? It's the famous kind of catchphrase of a digital twins. You would think that the person that owns the physical place might own the data representation. I don't know if it's the correct way to explain it, but it's the same thing, I guess, for citizens, right? Moving to another piece of your triangle. I think if the data economy was kind of the physical economy or the physical world, we might not be, you know, going around really well because they'd be hurdled, that we think they're not clear and we're not sure. So I think what we have to put in there, just to finish on one word that obviously I have in front of me every day, is trust, right? I think there's a lot of trust missing, and part of what I hope we can accomplish maybe today is like try to define a bit more how this trust would look like.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for that. Maybe Paul Olivier, to you to react.
Yes, thank you. So yes, of course, I would echo what you said, but I think there is a lot of value that is latent, that value of this data that is latent in the fact that it's siloed right now. So it's collected by many big actors. Essentially, right now, each of us has a contract with the 5 biggest companies in the world, which is something that wasn't the case 20 years ago. And each of those companies collecting massive amounts of data for its own benefit. It might give a slice or a very tiny view of it to other companies, but it very much selects what can be done with this. And this value gets concentrated into very few actors. If instead we start thinking about the individual, you know, humans, taking a human-centric perspective, think of the individual as the integration point for all of this data, all of their needs, all of their desires, stemming from it, all of the opportunities that could be also that could derive from this data, all of the things that could be done essentially, even to address systemic problems, social problems. Then we have a whole host of new services to build, new opportunities for doing things with this data. And right now, we're hampered to do that. All this data is siloed. Now, some regulations are coming that are trying to facilitate the movement of data. So yes, it is in a sense a burden, but it's also a burden only if you think in the old ways, you know, the ways that worked in the past for just a few actors. And if you try yourself to be the new Google or things like that, it's most likely not going to work, not a sustainable way of doing things. It's really that. It's really a new approach to data that should be more sustainable also for building trust and maintaining trust.
And here we come back to the issue of trust. We're coming back to our triangle and the complex relationship where actually the individual or us as a citizen is on pars with others. So what role for us as citizens, also building on what Paul Olivier said? Maybe that's a good question to you, Thomas.
Yes, thank you. And it is true that most of us, almost all probably have contracts with some big companies. But we should not forget that this is also the choice of the people. And what I said before, basically, at least in our countries, most of the people do care about privacy. They do care about their rights. but then they're also lazy or just like to have good services, comfortable services. And there's a little bit of a mismatch between the theory and what they do in real life. It's the same with environmental conscience and then driving car from just because it's comfortable. So we're facing the same thing. And I think it should not be an either or, and we should not let it be an either or. So it's not either protecting your rights and be innovative and create services and use services, but all the stakeholders have a role to play, and the citizens, they need to be aware, first of all, what is going on. They need to want to know what is happening to the data. They need to put this higher up in their priority list of, I don't just like choose my flat because it's on the sunny side or on the shadow side, or because it's at the top of the building or at the bottom, whatever I prefer. I need to choose my services on the basis of how they treat my data, and there are differences. And on the other hand, and this is where the initiative that you mentioned comes in, it is also up to those that manage data, that are data trustees, data custodians, because they run platforms or because they are a government entity or public authority, that they earn the trust. It's always easy to say people need to trust, yes, but they need to have a reason to trust. So there needs to be a system that makes people trust, some safeguards that make system trust. And what we are trying to do currently in the Swiss government, when we're also talking to other people abroad, is created a network that is called Digital Self-Determination, where we try to bring all the actors together that want data to be used, but data to be used in a way that it is for the benefit of all those that share data, the citizens, the local companies, what have you. So we're looking at various sectors. It's the health sector, mobility, energy consumption, and then you can go on education, financing, and so on. And we try to find out, what is around there that is following a model like my data and others there are some examples, also some local examples. And we try to see, okay, what are irrespective of the particular sector, what are the elements that are necessary to create a trusted data space that allows all participants to control their data, to decide, okay, I want this, my data to be used for this, not for this. And I also want to somehow get my share of the benefit. And so we're looking into this, and the plan is in this report that we're writing for the government, that the next step will be to develop a voluntary, for the time being, code of conduct on how such a trusted data spaces should work, and in particular how the data custodian, what are the key elements for the data custodian to manage this data space, or the data custodians, so that this works. And of course, we are keen also to sharing experience with people from other countries, be it governments, be it private sector actors, be it civil society, academia, so that we see, okay, what works, what doesn't, why does it work? If it works, why doesn't it work? What's the differences in the different sectors? Because again, I think we all need to do the best to profit from this data, but the profit should be distributed in a way that it's not just to the benefit for a few, but actually to the benefit for.
Anything you could share concretely that surprised you, maybe in the findings of the working of the network?
Well, the thing is that everybody's thinking about this. Everybody, no matter whether you're responsible for energy distribution and you realize that the households measuring is not yet digitized and the producers are not all digitized, so you need to digitize them, but they are refusing because they're afraid. The producers are afraid to lose contact with the consumers. The consumers are afraid to be tracked. Sometimes it's by the state or be manipulated, and sometimes it's by the state or by private sector actors. But basically everybody knows that there's a lot of things to be done, and this is across all sectors. It's the same, but the market regulation is different. Sometimes you have only 5. In the transport sector, you have one big, like in Switzerland, the train, the railways, but then you have 100 small ones like scooter rentals, what have you. In the energy, you have hundreds of players that produce, and you have millions that consume, and there's different histories to them. And you need to know what each of the actors is afraid of losing. If you don't know, you will never get them to trust you, because everybody has got something to lose. So everybody needs to talk about what are the conditions that make me say yes I'm part of this space. I'm willing to share my data, willing to share with others. And this is the critical factor is what is preventing people and companies and to participate in such space. Thank you.
No, this is a good way of looking at it. Yes, kind of changing the perspective a little bit. Now let's talk a little bit about the intersection of human rights and business in the data protection discourse. And this is a question for you because that's your bread and butter, Lena.
Yeah, well, not specifically on data protection, I should add, but no, I think what we've heard already obviously signals the complexity of the issues, which is why we from the human rights community, it's not about making bespoke solutions around across this vast impacted policy domains, but saying what are the underlying global values that need to be reflected and embedded into whatever policy context we are in. So really having those shared global values, and the International Human Rights Framework is that, we would say, in different jurisdictions there is in different contexts. There's a lot of talk about ethical values. They, of course, will change depending on where you are. So really having that global understanding of what are the sort of underpinnings of these solutions that will have to find its way into the many different contexts that you were outlining. So from our perspective, the work that we are doing in the business context is in our BTEC project, where we, again, a little bit from the same what I was just saying, that business comes in at so many different entry points, both in data collection, in the development of the technologies that create data, that gather data, that enables us to use data. So instead of coming in and saying, now we have to find a specific solution to this problem and reinvent standards or come up with what should be the appropriate standards to resolve a particular problem, we say, well, we actually do have standards for business. And if we're talking human-centered approach, again, going back to the human rights framework as the sort of core of a human-centered approach. So for business, we have the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which has been unanimously endorsed by the Human Rights Council, by member states of the United Nations, uptake by companies, including in the tech sector. So what we are trying to do in the project is we're working with companies themselves to try to say, what if we apply the lens of the guiding principles to wherever you are in the stack, in the ecosystem, what does it mean to prevent harm to people? What does it mean to do due diligence, human rights due diligence, as you're developing, deploying, or developing and deploying these systems? What are the kinds of internal processes in a company that you need to? What is the internal governance? What is the internal, at what stages do the right people in a company need to know to take into consideration the lens of thinking through what the impact on people might be, what the risk on people might be? Again, we have the framework, and that can be applied across these different activities, these different regimes, these different technologies. So to converge, align around a common set of expectations that is then can be deployed, but also measured, and there can be accountability for how that works. And it goes very much also to the policy, to the role of policymakers in setting the right framework, the right incentives, both for good behavior for company, where there are this due diligence, this risk management approach, not in a way that would undermine innovation, but saying, well, sometimes innovation actually, there need to be some guardrails around it. And if we're talking from a basic perspective of avoiding harm to people, that's okay. We can innovate a little bit less if we bake that into the system. But the real benefit of these technologies are if they can be used and deployed with the risk to people being mitigated. So that's what we're trying to do.
Thank you very much. And I see we are coming back a lot to how us as citizens need to change how we think and internalize about this, how businesses think about this, of course, governments as well. So there is a big shift in our thinking on all fronts that has to be happening. Maya, listening to these reflections from our other speakers, would you like to react? And I also understand there is quite some rich discussion in the chat, so we will be coming to you all very soon. But Maya, may I ask you?
Yeah, and I'll try to be a bit shorter this time. I learned that you're going to get to me more time, so I will not say in just one go. So I think my first reaction is that it should be a multi-stakeholder governance. The responsibility should be shared on many levels. Policymakers, that means regulators, should lay down new regulations, but also educate, information campaign and things like that. And then data holders who hold data, or data producers, and also communities who are affected with this data should be involved, and on many levels, international, national, local. This is a huge, it affects everyone, and not necessarily just subjects or objects who are data collected from. So this is my first reaction. And the second reaction is currently individuals are, or individuals involved in process of collection of data can be affected. It's not necessary that they are the only subjects who are affected. But it seems that the most prevailing response, or the only response right now, is protection of privacy. So maybe we should rethink the whole infrastructure. I will use this word, maybe it's not the most suitable one, how to respond to these issues. It's communities are at stakes, and also individuals that don't even, that are not firstly affected, but are affected in more broader sense, because sometimes you can gather information of someone from collecting data from others. So these are important issues, but the more we know, the better we'll deal with that. And of course, we cannot rely on soft regulation. I mean, I think the Facebook is overflown with the articles that Facebook's problem is Facebook. So I hope we learn from that. I purposely used the trademark and the name of the company to make this remark. But of course, it's much broader. It's not the only problematic player out there. Thanks.
No, thank you. Thank you, Maya, also bringing some provocative points. But now, if I can go to Stephanie, what has been going on in the chat, please?
Thanks, Teresa, for the floor. Yes, indeed, quite a rich discussion. I'm not going to convey all the questions so far because some are in the making, so some are evolving, but there seems to be quite a strong reaction, especially to the points which Pascal and Paul made regarding the concentration of data. So the comments by Richard Hill and Marilia Maciel, our colleagues joining us via Zoom here, are basically pointing to the same direction. So there is a concentration of data, and it's practically by the same few handful of people, or rather the companies. So how can this concentration, how can this silo of data, how can all this concentration be distributed equally? And that's essentially the message that, or the question that is being posed here. So how to distribute this concentration equitably, and linked to that, a question specifically to Maya, and that's linking to the work of the Global Partnership on AI. And the question is whether the Global Partnership is dealing specifically with this issue. Teresa, I'll ask for the floor again in a few minutes. Over to you.
Mm-hmm. No, thank you very much, Stephanie, for that. This is great. So first question asked by Richard Hill and Marilia Maciel, specifically to Pascal and Paul, but we will of course invite everybody else to react about the concentration of data and equal distribution. You have the microphone in your hand, so it's logical you start, Pascal.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's a great question, right? I mean, we see some antitrust movement, for example, to take an economic view in the US, right? We know there's this kind of almost two big data empires to survive, and it's killing innovation, right? I mean, back to one of your point is if there's just such a concentration of data and I'm a small company and I don't have any raw materials to train my models or to test something, I won't be there. Then there's a almost kind of sovereignty elements to it as well, right? Which is, okay, why is all the data concentrated not only in maybe a couple of companies, but in regions as well when it's produced somewhere, right? So I think there's mechanisms to come up with, and I'll turn to the pro in a minute, but I found, for example, super interesting the concept of data trust, right? Putting some intermediaries between you and the kind of use of your data, right? So you're producing it, there's someone on your behalf with fiduciary duty, there's something that can be automated where basically you're not kind of giving away, but you kind of start to realize a bit the value that you're getting. Because I think Thomas was talking of comfort. Yeah, it's great. I'm the first one. I love being on an app that does sports data, for example. Would I want the data to go anywhere in the wild? Certainly not, right? So I think there's these elements to it. And then I'll add maybe a bit of a techno-optimistic view as well, which is to say, I think that some of the privacy enhancing technology we heard from Maya before might be coming soon, right? I think we haven't been able yet to kind of completely bring this kind of trust by design into the way that we're conducting our business online. But let's hopefully see a value of technology, right? I feel fairly comfortable when I'm in my email system, for example, let alone some phishing and stuff, right? But how can we build this up in the other elements of this data economy infrastructure?
Thank you for these reflections, and I will pass it immediately to you, Paul Olivier.
Yes, thank you. So thank you for the question as well. So I think to introduce some disagreement, I would disagree partly with what was said. So it is the responsibility of citizens, but a lot of them care. It is partly the responsibility of citizens. A lot of them care a lot about their data, actually. But in practice, it's very hard to know what happens with your sports app data. And what we see is that it's not just in that context. I mean, if you get hurt in some countries, you go to the hospital, that data goes to certain companies, private companies. I won't name them right now, but it goes there and you don't know what happens with it. If you just want to use public transport, and in some cases in Switzerland, same thing happens. You don't know. You have no choice, really. If you go to a newspaper, you might pay for a subscription. Same thing. You don't know how this data goes. So transparency is one of the key elements to generate more trust. And we see that a lot when I try to work, or when we try to work with citizens who are interested in this, trying to build data trusts in mobility sector, in the attention economy sector, or generally in data literacy, they care a lot about this transparency, and they see it as an activating mechanism to do more, to fish for new opportunities, to try to do more things. And I think that to address Richard's question, that's a key mechanism for more equity around this use of data, this transparency. And this finally gets back to the human rights question, because I think what happens right now is there's this massive concentration of power into a few companies, and this huge imbalance. But you also have to see that internally, there is a huge imbalance and huge asymmetry of knowledge. Just a few people inside some of the biggest companies in the world have a perspective on the whole impact for social impact of their own, big company of tens of thousands of people. And that, to me, increases the importance of whistleblowing in this context. So we've seen it in the past week. So not to name them, but Facebook had a very hard week. Why? Because there was one whistleblower, it seems, that came forward with a huge amount of information, just one person. Why didn't they come? And they're talking about things that happened years ago. Why didn't they come earlier with this, about stuff that impacts, presumably they were in the US, that person was in the US, but it affects populations worldwide in many different ways. So this person that presumably had an interest in preserving some forms of human rights, why didn't they step up earlier? Now, if you go and look at Facebook's documents where they say that they have a business and human rights policy in line with the principles, they mention whistleblowing. They mention that in the file. then you go and you click there and you see, you end up with on a website of Facebook that talks about whistleblowing, mostly relating to sexual harassment in the workplace in the US. And this was in their report on preserving human rights. So I'm not saying, of course, the other one is not important, but it's a very different perspective on what should be defended worldwide.
No, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Would others like to react? Yes, Lena, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with what you're saying. And I think what we are finding in the work that we are doing is that it so much is essentially not so much about corporate policies and what is written in corporate policies, but it's about corporate governance and corporate culture. And I think that as one is doing policy and regulatory frameworks for how these sort of the development of the technology, but essentially also setting up the parameters for how business actors are developing this. I think it's an often overlooked element of what is the corporate culture and how can one regulate through the corporate governance tools. It's less obvious than think about, other things, but it really goes to the heart of a number of the issues as far as we can see that, and also in talking to people from inside the companies, obviously, both through our community of practice and as well as with external stakeholders, that there is a lot to be done there, because of course we would say from implementation of the UN guiding principles isn't just having a human rights policy, it's implementing the commitment to human rights, which means addressing all salient risks and not just pick, for example, sexual discrimination that is particularly relevant in a particular country, or where it's easy to say that we protect, for example, inclusion of LGBTI communities, but looking at where you're operating and where these risks against particular people, against particular minorities or other groups, and then addressing those, and not through a sort of a la carte, you handpick the issues you care about. So it really is the meaningful implementation of these policies is looking at what is the tone from the top and what does that mean in terms of the implementation through and embedding through all the relevant parts of the company, and not just what is written. I mean, a human rights policy can be a very good thing. That's an important thing, but it really, we're seeing that having that is not necessarily super meaningful if it's not fully supported and embedded from the top.
Thank you very much, Lena. And Thomas, you would like to react to? So, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, on the oligopoly or monopoly is a question. Of course, this is an antitrust issue, but it's also a question. And then maybe it's because I'm having this disease that I'm coming from a direct democratic country that in the end it's the people that decide how they want to be regulated or what system they have, whether if something has scaling effects and leads to monopoly or to an oligopoly, the people can want this to be a public monopoly versus a private monopoly. And just to give you one example, I'm not saying that the people have all in their hands and it's the main responsibility of the citizens. This is not the main, but they also do have a responsibility. We had a vote last year on an electronic ID. Switzerland is lagging behind. We still do not have an electronic ID. And then there was a proposal in the sense of like, we have to do this as quickly as we can. So we don't trust the IT system of the public service because they're probably not good enough. So let's give it to some well-known Swiss companies that everybody knows, like, and the railways and the postal private operators and the Migo, the supermarkets and so on. And in the end, people said no, because they did not trust to give their identity, the core of their identity, to a consortium of private companies, even if they know them well. In the end, it turned out that so people said no to this law. So that the government is now back at square one, because they realized that people want this to be a state thing. So your ID is not something that you want to buy on the market because you don't trust people, or you think that they will not give it to you for the least price because they will want to make profit, even if they declared that they didn't. And so this is just one example of, without public pressure, without people expressing their opinions, even if there's no alternative, let's say, on the market yet. It was the same also with environmental protection. Transparency started, and at least some changes of behavior started because people were demonstrating in the streets. So beginning in our country, they vote. So you need to the industry and the governments, they need to feel that people care about this. But of course, people need to know what is at stake and so on. And consumer protection is also something that did not start from one day to the second, but that has a history. So we also need to develop this. So people need to be supported, but it's not just that people have no choice. They do have a choice, but they need to fight for their rights as well. Governments have a responsibility, but people also. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Coming to you, Maya, any reflection on this previous question? And then there was obviously the specific question to you. To what extent does global partnership where you work deal with the issues we are discussing today? No, we have a problem.
We resolved the problem. Thank you very much.
We resolved the problem. I'm glad to hear that. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Teresa. A small problem, which was muted microphone. Only that problem. Thank you for the mic. First, the reflection to the comment of Ambassador Schneider. And second, I'll try to reply to the question if I remember correctly. Ambassador Schneider did a very nice example of direct democracy that it's taking place many times per year in Switzerland. And it works well if citizens are well informed, they have high skills on the topic, they're high information on that, and they're active. I agree about that. But on a social network, when you're asked whether you want to see yourself, how you will look in 20 years, this is not the same informative referendum taking place, but you're giving away a lot of your data. You're training machine learning system for facial recognition. So with this example on my side, I want to make a point that the citizens, even if they want to protect their personal data, if they want to be on the top of situation, sometimes they're not capable of. So we cannot put the responsibility only on the shoulders of private citizens. Although, as I tried to highlight before, we give them the tool to protect their privacy, but with just protection of one human right, which is privacy, we will not resolve the pressing issues that the current machine learning system and artificial intelligence system and massive collection of data is putting on our societies. We will need to sometimes rethink the whole principles and then to design maybe new infrastructure. Of course, there are some infrastructure. Again, I'm using this word for something huge, like something, this magical solution that comes from many sides and it's not there yet. But we need to work on that. And it's not on the shoulders of the citizens. It's on the shoulders of institutional players, on policymakers, on everyone. And at the end of the day, only with cooperation, higher skills, knowledge, and education, we will not end up in complete disastrous result. I try to be optimistic always, but selling privacy for one chewing gum, it's sometimes that I use when I talk to kids about these issues. So this is just a comment to Ambassador Schneider. And now I will try to answer the question, which I tried to find in the chat, which was, I understood whether our working group for data governance in GPay will go into this question of the distribution of access and reuse of data. I mean, I already mentioned before that our current two projects are to advancing research and practices on data justice and enabling data sharing for social benefit through data trust, which is just one way of potential good solution for collaborative data stewardship. So I'm very convinced that in this research project, practice on data justice, one of important issues will be also like how is data access and potential reuse distributed globally. But we are asking ourselves what we don't know. And we are entrusting this role to a very competent researchers to give us more information about that. In half a year, we will know more. It was also in the chat that governments try to do policies and try to talk, but they work and act less. And now this is not answering to this question, but it's my final comment. I come from Slovenia, beautiful, I say not small, but boutique country, but it's not difficult to put some great strategy on paper and do the photo shooting with politicians talking about high strategy and stuff. But when this needs to be implemented, or when this needs to be supported by financial resources, then everything is a little less active. Let's put it on, let's use this word to stay diplomatic. So it's more important than talking is working on this, like real action. I feel that in GPay, although is this multi-stakeholder initiative on very high level, we try to be pragmatical and practical and try to narrow down our tasks and demonstrate what as Jenny Tennyson, my co-chair, says, like it's important when you frame project to ask what you don't know and what you want to know, and we are doing that. So, and our future work is on advancing research and practice on data justice. So I'm convinced that this question of equity among access to data and what you can, how you can access and reuse the data also in the research is going to be addressed as well. So this from me.
No, thank you very much for that, Maya. Again, quite provocative answers. We like that here. We were reacting. You couldn't see us, but we were reacting with smiling and nodding. Now, let's bring this discussion a little bit closer to home, our home in Geneva. Why Geneva actually matters, the actors here. And as you know, this event is in cooperation with the European Union Delegation, and want it or not, the European Union Delegation has quite some presence here in Geneva. And we cannot talk about all these things without talking about the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which has had so many spillovers globally. Now, let's listen to a short video, what our colleagues from the EU delegation want to share with us about GDPR. If I may ask you to play the short video, please.
With increasing digitalization, the amount of data exchange is immense.
And we want our citizens to have a better control over the use of their personal data.
It's basically a pillar of empowerment of the citizens in digital era.
There are many benefits of the GDPR for companies as well, in terms of transparency, harmonization of rules across the EU and its member states,
and a clear definition of responsibilities in processing personal data when doing business.
We now have designated data protection authorities in all EU member states.
These authorities can then represent the citizens with infringing companies, for example, by imposing fines. At first, there was a wave of pushback within the EU, but also outside, because the GDPR surpasses the EU borders in some areas.
And the GDPR has emerged as a key reference point at international level and acted as a catalyst for many countries to introduce similar modern policy laws.
So it has been a positive experience.
Thank you very much to Radka and Lucia from the EU delegation. Now, GDPR, I think we can agree, was a little revolution. Now, I want to talk more about the spillovers to Geneva and globally. Maya, can I start with you if you want to reflect? No, if you don't want to, you don't have to.
No, actually, I'm no.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah. Pascal, please.
I'll give Lena some time to warm up. No, I think I'll basically play back two keywords that we heard before, where I think Geneva stands really strongly. And by Geneva, I mean the Geneva region, right? The first one is multi-stakeholder. I think there's no other place, and we see it in the great panel that you've done, where you can actually bring the people together. And one example I'll throw in, which actually encompasses a little bit of a again, larger region, larger kind of technology and policy view, is the Trust Valley, for example, that has a lot of programs, bring regulators and others, and just kind of continue to expand a bit the boundaries of what can be done in a multi-stakeholder environment. And then the second one, I was inspired by what Maya said. I think it's the word action, right? I think policy is great, but what you have in Geneva is you have a lab at scale, right? We can all kind of meet and we can all kind of walk to one another, almost use the wonderful garden. I know it's your kind of extended meeting room here, Teresa. And a policy action lab is actually something at scale where you can try things, right? So the next version of GDPR, maybe you bring this group together and you test it really at scale and bring it to the people for reflection and learning. So I think Geneva is extremely well placed for the next stages of these topics and discussion.
Thank you very much for that. Thomas, I'm sure you want to talk about International Geneva. Go ahead, please.
Well, actually, I start with a remark of Maya and then the GDPR. First of all, Maya, I did not say it's up to citizens. I just said they have a role to play too. That's a slight difference. And the GDPR, I think the GDPR showed that if Europe, if 500 billion consumers and some policymakers pull the same rope, they're actually big enough to make a difference. Whether the GDPR is the solution to everything is another discussion, but it showed that Europe is, if we go united, and I say we, taking into account the whole of Europe, not necessarily only the European Union, if we go united, then we can actually make a difference. And Geneva here, of course, is one of the places or one key place where it's not just the geographical Europe or the EU, it's actually the whole world that is represented. And if we manage to go united, all countries, all stakeholders, then we can make a difference. Or if we, in ICANN and in the ITF, they call it the rough consensus. If it's a large majority, then just one word about the GDPR. Also there, I guess we're all, the most visible result of the GDPR is that before I go on a website, there's a thing pumping up that tells me like, are you fine that we use all your data for I don't know what? Or do you want to go into the details and actually say no to some of the uses that we propose? I mean, the way the industry puts it to you is always, it's cumbersome to protect yourself, to use your rights. And also there, it's good that we have this opportunity now. This is thanks to the GDPR. I don't know what the research says of how many people actually take the 10 seconds on average before they go on a website. And if you go on a website 10 times a day, you have to sometimes fill it out 10 times a day. I try to do it in 95% of the cases, unless I really have no time. But just to say also there, you get a tool, but it somehow makes life more cumbersome. And you need to want to care and click on the buttons to say, okay, I will actually only use the cookies that are necessary and not the rest.
No, thank you very much, Thomas, for that. And now we have a bit of a problem because we have about 2.5 minutes left. And I know there is a lot going on in the chat. Stephanie, could you tweet style share with us what has been going on?
All right, the conversation is quite burning here. What I will do, since at Diplo we have many conversations on data justice, to also use the taxonomy that Maya has used, and I like that a lot, data justice. I'll only pass over one comment, and that's by Alicia Shepherd. So my apologies to other commentators like Marilia's, the comment on baseline framework, etc. That will leave for a different conversation. So the point that Alicia made is the fact that especially in developing countries, governments talk a lot about data, and again, back to the issue of the concentration. So a lot of discussions there, but nothing is really happening that will, let's say, put the balance in favor more of the citizens. So a lot of talk, but no concrete action for the benefit of the citizens. It's referring mostly to developing countries, but given the concentration, what we're seeing in just one or two, or let's say at the most a handful of countries, I wouldn't say it's just developing countries. So any final reactions on that?
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie. Olivier, would you like to holding the microphone? Something quick on developing countries and the situation.
Yes, so I think I'm wrapping up many of the themes around Geneva as well. So we heard mention of data trust from the UK, data custodian in Switzerland. There was a talk of the GDPR, but in a sense, the GDPR is already the past. I mean, Europe has passed several new acts: the Data Market Act, Data Service Act, Data Governance Act, soon the Data Act, where they are trying to find a middle balance of groups of people, communities that start administering their data. Usually in Europe, the talk is about an American choice or Chinese choice on how data should be dealt with. And I think we should listen to other countries as well, because they have a much more community-driven approach to data. For instance, in India, on having communities managing their own data as a resource. Here, there are some posters about managing water. It's an issue that has been very prevalent. Should we build big dams that collect massive amounts of water? Should we let the water flow? Who should benefit from the water? Well, it's a lot of the same issues with data, and it's not addressed at a country level. It should be much more local, much more topic driven as well. And I think that's where Geneva can shine in those discussions.
Well, and that's nice. Kind of final remarks. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I have to cut this conversation here. There is a lot to unpack. The good news is the event series will continue in October. We will come back together again. You will receive information. I would like to thank once again to the European Union Delegation in Geneva, the Permanent Mission of Slovenia, the Permanent Mission of Switzerland, and us here at the Geneva Internet Platform. And of course, big applause to Maja Bogata-Jancic joining us from Slovenia, Pascal, Lene, Paul Olivier, and Thomas. Thank you for spending the afternoon with us, and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.